Hello, welcome to episode 7 of Second Mind Medicine. So let me know if the feed is coming through okay on the different channels, audio and video. In the meantime, I'll just put down some information here for this is where you can find generally more information. And also, some people were asking about other posts. Some of the content we talk about is related to Second Mind Medicine, but overall, I talk about the Three Minds framework in the context of different ideas, whether it's science or philosophy or spirituality. So some of that can be found on the social media account here at Dr. Anoop Kumar. So lately there have been a couple questions about frameworks that other people use. For example, the philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti or Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Every person has their own framework, their own way of communicating. So some of the questions related to that have recently been posted on the social media account. Great. Thank you, Josh, Deep, Karen, Becca, Antonio. All right, looks like everything's coming out okay. So as everybody continues to jump on, let's just spend a few moments here together. Taking the time to let go of the content of ideas, distinct concepts, distinct feelings, distinct boundaries. We need boundaries to express, and we can also appreciate this domain beyond boundary. This shared space that goes beyond ideas of physicality, mentality, real, virtual. We're all simply here. Breathing in and out of here. And then reassuming, repopulating the boundaries and saying hello. All right. So let me just, so for the old videos, I see people asking about the old videos. They're here. So in the last couple weeks, I've received a lot of comments about possibly putting less information into one of these sessions and shortening them, because I think in this series, this is the 7th one. In the previous series, there were about 30. And so many people have not caught up to this point because many of them are well over 30 minutes, an hour or more. So what we'll do is shorten these so that maybe more people can go through them and we can have more interaction that way. So today what we'll do is simply go through a few questions from the last couple weeks. All right. And of course, you can ask questions as we go along here as well. All right. The other series, okay. I see people asking about the Is This a Dream series is not on Second Mind Medicine website. That's on the other website because that's a little bit more into the philosophy and into the experience of the different kinds of minds. So I tend to leave that out of Second Mind Medicine generally. So let's look at a couple of these questions. The first one was, does medication prevent evolution? All right, a big question. Does medication prevent evolution? So, many times we hear this idea that we want to heal naturally, right? We want to heal by natural methods and not by artificial methods. Or we want to eat natural foods and not artificial foods, right? So I think this is kind of what this is arriving at. Is medication something artificial that is going to hinder our evolution? And so what do we mean by this split between natural and artificial? Essentially, what we mean by nature generally is that which is present and exists independent of human thought and human intervention, right? So, for example, the oceans are independent of our human conscious thought, right? Of course, at a deeper level, there's a connection, but in terms of conscious, distinct thinking, it is not our distinct thinking that creates the ocean, for example, right? Or the mountains, or space, or the galaxies, or for that matter, trees and plants, right? These are all what we call natural. Human beings ourselves are natural, right? It is not that there were human beings that then thought about human beings and created human beings. So then what we mean by artificial then is that now human thinking becomes involved and modifies this in some way, right? And then we tend to think of that as something artificial. But of course, many things, almost most things that we create in this world are through thinking, right? So what does this mean that the entire human-made world is artificial? Well, that's a matter of opinion. But when we take a look at medicine, the question is about medicine and whether taking medication hinders evolution. When we look at medication, we'll see that human thinking has modified nature as it is since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humans, right? So, for example, drugs today are derived from the digitalis plant, right? Aspirin, salicylates are also derived from a plant, right? And of course, we know the huge field of psychedelics, and we know there's research into how these plants can give us insight deeper into the mind and help us heal, even, right? So we know that although human thought modifies nature, modifies the environment, that it can go in a couple different ways. And this is where the idea of medication possibly hindering evolution comes from, right? In a sense, we are always evolving. No matter what we do, no matter what choice we make, the next day happens and the next day happens. Not only that, but learning happens. Learning is inevitable no matter what choices we're making. So when we're talking about evolution, what we're really talking about is modifications through human thinking that we actually understand, where we're aware of the implications of what we're doing, where we're aware of the underlying assumptions and the background knowledge, right? Just as in any situation, if I'm acting without that awareness, that can lead astray. If I'm driving a car, but I don't have the knowledge of how the steering wheel works and the brake works, I haven't taken the drive-in test, then there's a chance I'm going to go astray, right? We can call that, in a sense, an artificial process because the underlying knowledge isn't there to be able to handle that in a responsible way, in a beneficial way, or we could even say in a way that helps us evolve, right? If the car crashes, it could kill us, right? So similarly with what we call medication, right, which is essentially some substance that we're taking into our body, right? Food in a sense could be medication. If we're talking strictly about pharmaceutical drugs, which is what I think the question is hinting at, right? All of this background is important to see where the question is coming from. But this question is hinting at pharmaceutical drugs, I believe. So when we're talking about pharmaceutical drugs, the question again is, are we aware of the background of what is happening? A simple example is the skin, right? If there's an infection of the skin and the underlying structures, right? A diagnosis for that could be cellulitis, right? So one of the treatments for cellulitis is an antibiotic, right? So by using this antibiotic, it can inhibit the growth of the bacteria that is causing this infectious and inflammatory condition of the skin. Now, it is not only the presence of bacteria, however, that is causing the problem, right? For that infection to set in, the underlying state of the organism has to also be susceptible to that infection, right? In some conditions, like for example, in diabetes, if the blood sugar is unregulated, then that host, that organism, is much more susceptible to developing an infection if the bacteria gets under the skin, right? In somebody who doesn't have uncontrolled blood sugar levels, that very same bacteria, the very same scratch or the very same cut that allows the bacteria to break the skin barrier, that very same process may not cause an infection. Why? Because the condition of the host is different, right? So all of this kind of background knowledge has to inform our use of medication, right? So if it's simply the idea that, skin infection, cellulitis, antibiotic, done, and that's the whole picture, then I would say that is not contributing to our evolution because we're simply blindly doing a kind of mix and match process. And eventually, we're going to run out of medications that we can use, as we are seeing with antibiotic resistance, right? So in this case, and this is true for any medication, even beyond medication, it's true for any food, right? If we replace the word medication here with food, does food prevent evolution, right? Does going to such and such a place prevent evolution? All of this is not really dependent on that particular place or this particular food. It's dependent on how we are using it, why we're using it, how aware we are of the entire context, right? I think this is important because this informs a lot of popular conversations that are happening today, right? So there is a tendency as a person becomes more aware of their bodies, more aware of their layers, more sensitive to how the environment and the sea of information around us is influencing us and how we influence it. There's a tendency to discard a whole bunch of things, including possibly medications, right? And what I'm saying about that is it's not a right or wrong process. It has to be dependent on how much we know about ourselves and what our own state is, what our own condition of health is, right? So medication neither hinders nor helps evolution. Medication is a tool like anything else that we can use in our lives that has to go along with a certain level of education, curiosity, and understanding. All right. So a lot of people saying good evening from India. Hello. Texas, Tacoma, Washington. All right. Yvonne is asking for the other website. The other website is this, Yvonne. So that's a website where it has a more general and broad and deep approach to philosophy and self-exploration and experimentation, whereas Second Mind Medicine is a little more focused on medicine and healing. All right, the next question is pain an illusion? All right, is pain an illusion? So you will hear nowadays a lot of conversation around illusion, especially in the spiritual community. right? Most of this comes from the ancient Indian idea of Maya, right? Maya, which is often very loosely and often inadequately translated as illusion, right? And the whole background of this is that as the mind becomes subtler and as awareness is not restricted to the domains of physicality and mentality, then the very idea of the independent existence of the external world, we're now actually getting back to the previous series, is this a dream? But we have to touch on that to answer this question. Right? The very idea of an independent existence of an external world comes into question. And we can explore that in many ways, which we're not going to do right now, but it is there in great detail in the previous series. Right? So, because that comes into question, and because there is a range of experience in which that identity is then starting to question the relationship of self and world, starting to question the relationship of the individual and the whole, or of me and you, of the other. All of these start coming into play, not only intellectually, but experientially in the world, right? So, for this stage, many times this interpretation is given that the world is an illusion, or pain is an illusion, or the body is an illusion, right? But in fact, we have to go beyond this understanding. Also, we should recognize that a lot of these translations have become very popular in the last several decades, right? As Eastern traditions became more popular, yoga, meditation, all of this is a household word now, right? It's pretty much part of the common vernacular. So now we need a little bit more subtlety in explaining or in discerning what these actually mean, right? So Maya, for example, is that which is and is not, right? And because that's a very subtle wording, it's very commonly thrown out and just say it's illusion, right? Well, no, it's not really illusion. It is and is not, and there's a way to explore that. So similarly, pain is not an illusion. I think that can be a very hurtful interpretation to suggest that pain is an illusion. It is not. There are a lot of people in pain all the time, right? We see people in tremendous pain in the ER. The ER, if you can think about it, the emergency department is in a way the epicenter of pain, right? Because people with all kinds of pain, whether it's physical or mental, spiritual, emotional, any kind of pain, when there's nowhere else to go and it's bubbling up, the ER is always open 24/7, right? It doesn't mean we always have the solutions, but there's always somebody there. And so, no, pain is not an illusion. Absolutely not. Pain is an experience, right? We can leave it at that. It is an experience. It is an incredibly intimate experience. It is an incredibly powerful experience. In fact, we might even say that the two most important experiences in life, the two most impactful experiences in life are love and pain, right? Love is that which expands and draws us toward, and pain is that which can constrict, right, and create difference. But as we explored last week, pain itself can be an opening, right? We can move into the pain and explore and see where that goes. So, yes, at different layers of identity, at different levels of subtlety, at different layers of the body, pain is experienced differently, right? And that's why some people may say it's an illusion. Let's take an example. Let's say there was some kind of injury, right? Like a thorn went into your side, right? We're using a metaphor literally, right? There's a thorn in your side. Let's say you were gardening and a big thorn went into the side of your abdomen. It's a sharp, acute pain that's there, right? And of course, it hurts. Now imagine that as this is hurting, your best friend that you hadn't seen in a decade shows up and says, "Hey, have you been? Haven't seen you forever." And you start talking. For that moment, the pain will be less. The suffering from that pain, the experience of pain will be less, right? For the simple reason that our attention has shifted, right? Just as if I'm looking here right now, things are very clear, right? The visual field of vision, the field of vision from the eyes is very clear when looking like this. Now, if I turn to the side, this is still visible, but it's not clear. It's blurry, right? Why? Simply because the attention has shifted. So this is occupying my space and not this. Similarly, when our attention shifts to something else, the experience of pain changes, right? It simply shows that as attention or awareness or even identity shifts, our experience of pain is always changing, right? Imagine now you're falling asleep. So you're kind of aware of pain, kind of not aware of pain. Now you fall asleep, the pain disappears completely, right? Now you have a dream, and in the dream, there's an experience of the body having pain because that experience of pain is informing this dream character. So we can see radically different experiences of pain depending on the sense of identity. This is what leads people to say that pain is an illusion. But in fact, no, it is not that pain is an illusion. It is an experience that is experienced and recognized differently depending on attention, awareness, and identity. All right. All right. So, next question is what's going on in autoimmune conditions, right? So, this is a big topic by itself. We can we can begin to approach it by simply saying that. So, what is an autoimmune condition? Of course, auto means reflexive or automatic, and immune refers to the immune system, which is in charge of keeping the body healthy and, in fact, keeping the sense of self in a sense, right? Because the immune system discerns between self and other, right? And when it detects an other that is not compatible with self, it starts to become active, right? It activates or it becomes more active to address the situation, this apparent intruder in the system. So an autoimmune disease is when the body is automatically responding. The immune system is automatically responding to something within itself, right? So what are some examples? Diabetes, type 1 diabetes is very common, possibly the most common autoimmune condition, right? And what happens in type 1 diabetes? Basically, the pancreatic cells, which secrete insulin, insulin is required for cells to absorb glucose from the bloodstream. And so the pancreatic cells that create this insulin are destroyed over time because of inflammation, right? So that destruction of the pancreatic cells causes a lack of insulin, which causes blood glucose levels to stay high, right? So this is the autoimmune condition in type 1 diabetes. And there are other ones too, of course. There's Crohn's disease. We see this often in the emergency department. This is an inflammatory condition of the bowel, where there are certain sections of the bowel that are inflamed and that can cause pain and can cause different bowel habits, right? Changes in our bowel habits. And of course, celiac disease and so on. There are many such conditions. The underlying factor is the same, where the immunologic system, the inflammatory pathway is activated, and in many cases, and because of this, there is some kind of experience of dysfunction or pain. And of course, the treatment in many of these cases is to suppress the inflammation, and that's why steroids are often prescribed for autoimmune conditions, right? So now, what is a second mind approach to this? Well, we talked about a broad approach for everything a few episodes ago in terms of second mind medicine, and that still holds true here, right? We talked about the 4 pillars of nutrition, movement, rest, and connection, right? Nutrition itself, in these examples of, let's say, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, in these examples, nutrition makes a big difference. The kind of food we eat makes a difference, right? Because the immune system is ultimately being activated by many factors. One of them is the food that we are taking in, right? So nutrition, movement, rest, connection are the standard approach for any condition, just because these are the essential elements of life, right? Our nutrition, how we move. And of course, we talked about these in detail before. Movement is not just movement of the physical structure. We talked about all this in previous episodes. And of course, from a second mind perspective, as we move to connection, connection is, of course, at three levels. Connection is not just closing my eyes and meditating, and that's all of connection. No, connection is connecting with the environment, connecting with the planet, connecting with nature, right? It's connecting in terms of relationships, connecting with others, and then, of course, connecting within and connecting with the sense of identity, the sense of who I am and what I am. And this is where the experience can actually shift, right? When we talk about inflammation, of course, we talk about inflammation at a physical level. When we're talking about type 1 diabetes, it's inflammatory action at the beta cells of the pancreas, at those particular cells, that's causing destruction of those cells and their ability to create insulin, right? That's an inflammatory condition. And same with other autoimmune conditions. There's some kind of inflammation going on. So we talk about it in the physical sense. And from a second mind perspective, what we are saying is that ultimately that which we call physicality is a representation of a deeper mentality, right? This is the broader second mind perspective from the three minds framework, right? Yes, at the individual level, we look at the physical structure. Then more deeply, we can look at the mental thoughts. Then we look at the energetic structure. We can look at ourselves as organizations of information and consciousness. This is the path through individual identity. And broadly, at some point, once we examine this identity in a subtle way, we can say that this entire representation of physicality is itself the reflection of a deeper mind, which we're calling here the second mind, right? And this is why we can say that inflammation at the physical level is a reflection of inflammation at the subtle level, at the mental level. Now, we have to be very careful here, because just like we can talk about illusion and pain, we have to be careful about saying that it is my thoughts in particular or his or her thoughts in particular that is creating that body, right? And that's the reason. If we just change our thoughts, we will change the body. Of course, there's some truth to this. If I think that I want to go to the gym and get bigger muscles, then that thought will lead to a change in the body, of course, right? But the more subtle we go, at some point, this body has been created even before we, as these individuals, are creating conscious thoughts, right? We're talking within the structure of this lifetime. So we have to be careful about saying that it is just my thoughts that is creating this body. No, it is much more than that. It is our feelings, it is our intuition, and beyond the sense of individuality, in a sense, it is the entire universe. Everything is coming together to create this representation, everything that we're experiencing right now. So yes, it is true that physical inflammation is a reflection of mental inflammation. However, we're not strictly talking about the individual mind. It is not just what is in this particular mind and this particular lifetime that is creating this body. We need a subtler and more expansive view, right? Because that can be a highly critical view. We can't put on somebody that, well, this is because you're thinking this way that this is happening, right? That is a kind of understanding that a person may come to themselves, may appreciate themselves. That's a different story. But we have to appreciate that the reflection of inflammation at the physical level has deep implications beyond just the individual. We have an inflamed society, right? We talked about this 2 weeks ago, I believe. We talked about the conditions of the society. What do we value, right? How do we value people? The general situation is inflamed. Of course, that's going to reflect in each of us as individuals as well. So the broader second mind approach is to address all of these factors, beginning with the nutrition, movement, rest, then looking at connection at all levels and addressing each of these factors in a systemic way. And what we'll do is we'll have another session where we'll talk about inflammation in detail. All right, so since we've agreed to keep these a little shorter so we can go through all these, I'll just do one more question here. This was, when meditating, I get conscious of my heartbeat, which is disturbing. Do you have any advice? I would say stay with the heartbeat. keep the attention on the heartbeat and see where it goes, right? So, one approach to meditation is to say that anything that comes into awareness has to be ignored or shouldn't be there, or we simply let go of focusing on that and allow it, whatever to come up and whatever to go, right? So, yes, that's one way to do it. And so, if that works, if the heartbeat comes up and we want to shift attention away, then we can do that. That's one way to do it. But if this thing keeps coming up and keeps disturbing, then why not just keep the attention there, right? We don't have to force the attention away. We don't have to force the idea of an empty mind, right? Which is impossible to force anyway, right? So the idea is not that a person never has thoughts, but the idea is that the person's identity is rooted and centered enough that thoughts can be used as they need to be used, and thoughts don't need to be there as they don't need to be there, right? Having the same thought over and over, or going in circles with certain ideas, the that kind of circulation or brooding rather than thinking, right? That's what we're trying to go beyond with meditation and with these practices of attention. So if the heartbeat keeps calling you and you feel that boom 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 boom, then all right, bring the attention to that. If you want, place the hand over the heart. And you can even enjoy it, right? Once we move away from the idea that I don't want to be focused on the heartbeat, or the heartbeat should not be taking my attention, then there's a kind of there's a vibration in it, there's a depth to it. Just imagine this heart that's beating from before the time you came out of your mother's womb till the time the body stops moving. The heart never rests the entire time, right? So it can be quite an intimate and deep experience to simply merge attention with that heartbeat. And in due time, as that happens, either that'll take your attention somewhere else, or quite naturally, once you've kind of filled up on that meal, so to speak, that attention on that heartbeat might kind of move on and that'll fall away. All right. So I would say go with the heartbeat and see what happens. So, yes, I know loads of questions. Please just do put them in here and I'll try to look over them this week. Or you can send it over the social media or elsewhere or on the website. I'm sorry I can't respond to all the questions, but certainly I will try to respond to as many as possible. So let's take a few moments here. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.